Welcome back to the whorehouse. I'm Metal, and today, well, I'm going to help you get into the good old fashion of sculpting, whether that be traditional or digital. We'll be looking at clays, tools, materials, and of course programs so you can get started either in clay or digital. This is not going to be a video about going through every type of clay, just more so the clays that I like to use and that I would recommend to other people, along with the tools and materials and the programs that we'll be going through. And by the end of this video, it should give you a bit of insight of maybe what you want to do and how to start with, well, creating your own art. So let's get started. Okay, so in front of me, I got some clays that I do like to use when I'm doing my art, my sculpting. We're gonna go through these clays from what I like to use to what I prefer. So starting out with very cheap dollar store clay. I believe this is plastiline clay right here. It's very affordable, $2.25. You can get it at your local dollar store. I did a video on this type of clay just to see how it was, and honestly, I really enjoyed using this clay. It's soft, it's malleable, it's reusable. I got a piece right here, very malleable. I mean, the clay is good enough for any beginner to get started with. As you can see, I sculpted this dude from using that clay. Actually, the same block of clay. They come in 1 pound blocks. It works just fine to, do up like mock-ups and maquettes, ideas for maybe bigger sculpts. And honestly, it does hold detail not too bad. It's pretty good. Now this is the type of clay that you don't want to bake in the oven, because if you do bake it, well, as you can see, it's gonna melt right there, right? So you don't want to create a sculpt. Throw it into the oven and then all of a sudden it's just everywhere. But great type of clay to get started with, very cheap and affordable. I like it, to be honest with you. Now we'll move on to another type of clay that's very common, is super sculpty. This is original. You can get original. You can get like different types of firmnesses, different colors. And this is oven baked clay. It's polymer clay. And this is the type of clay that, you make something and you throw it into the oven to bake and it becomes hard and you can paint it and keep it. So this is Super Sculpty Original right here. It's pretty soft. I'd say it's probably as soft as the dollar store clay. Maybe a little bit more gummy. I'm not a super big fan of Super Sculpty Original. I do like the firm. Unfortunately, I don't have any firm to show you around here. But if I was going to pick out of all the different kinds of Super Sculpty, I would say Super Sculpty Firm. It's like the gray color. It's really great, holds detail pretty well. You can bake it, you can paint it, and like right here, this was made from Super Sculpt. It's very hard, and I haven't painted it yet. Not sure what color I want to go with, but yeah, you can bake it, and it comes pretty hard. Though, if you do drop a Super Sculpty sculpt after baking it, well, it will shatter unless you have something called Cos clay. Now, I have yet to use this. I just got this in. Medium firm is what I got because I like my hard clays. The fantastic flexible plastic Cos clay sculpt. So this stuff is really neat. And it is really workable. You just gotta do a little bit of tenderizing to it. I know a couple people who do use it. And when you bake this stuff, it is bakeable. It actually becomes flexible, like a flexible plastic, as they say. So, you don't have to worry really about dropping your models when they're baked and them shattering, because it's flexible and, it could take a drop or two, I believe. Now, it's not indestructible, especially when it's baked. It can still snap if you bend it too much. From what I've done with this clay, which is not too much, I do like it. I feel like it's a better texture on the hands than the Super Sculpty, because Super Sculpty to me is too gummy. Has like this weird gummy feeling to it, whereas this feels a little bit more less gummy, if that makes sense. This firm, I recommend the medium firm. Not too hard, is not too soft, but I hear the soft is too soft and the firm is too firm, and the medium firm is just perfect. Now this stuff can be hard to find, so you just got to keep your eye out for it. This is a big bag of light stuff. This is foam clay. Now this stuff is widely used in like prop making or cosplays. I'm using this stuff to build antlers for a monster mask that I am currently making. This stuff is really neat as well. It's air dry. It cures in, I think, 72 hours. And it's widely used in cosplay to make props or things for your cosplays, skulls, or pretty much whatever you can think of, you can create with this stuff. And it becomes like super light and durable to where you can like carve it, add in pretty sharp detail. And a bonus with this is that it's pretty durable when it's cured because it's foam, right? You don't really have to worry about it. You can get other things to help make it more flexible to seal it. I mean, if you're gonna use this stuff and you want to do something, definitely use some like aluminum foil to kind of back it, give it extra strength. But you don't have to as well. When it cures, it becomes lighter than it was, which is pretty cool. But foam clay, pretty cool stuff. We're going to get into some good old monster clay. So this is monster clay gray. It comes in different grades, soft, medium, or hard. I like the gray for doing larger projects. So when it's cooled down, it's pretty much as hard as wax, as you can hear that. But once you get it warmed up, it's pretty easy to use. So it's like when it's cooled down, it's like wax, but once you warm it up, it becomes more like clay. You can melt it down as well into like a liquid form, which I've done many times. Some people melt this down into a liquid form and they kind of just paste it on to their armature and start a base like that. Or you don't have to, you can just get in there, carve it out, work with your fingers, and just start using it right away. It is my preferred clay. It comes in gray, it comes in a brown, like a chocolate brown, which I really like as well. And they also came out with a newer one, I think a couple years ago, green. That one's a little bit harder to find. I have not yet to try it out. I'm hoping sometime soon I'll be able to get some. The soft I haven't tried, but I hear it's pretty soft. You know, it's good if you have like arthritis in your hands. Like a lot of these softer clays are really good if you have arthritis in your hands. So this is what I made out of the monster clay gray. Just a little jack-in-the-box from Lethal Company. Now, you don't want to put this in the oven or else it is going to melt on you. But when it becomes cool, like I said, it becomes as hard as wax. So you can actually, you know, sculpt something and keep them if you want. I know some people who do paint these as well, if you want. If you're careful with them, they will last forever. And you can also reuse this clay if you want. You can sculpt something, melt it back down, and reuse the clay, which I really like. Now, comparing the gray, which, you know, you can like the gray medium, you take a piece here, you work with your fingers, it becomes pretty close to clay, right? But the hard stuff, this is monster clay hard. Well, this stuff is very, very hard. As you can see, very hard. It's very difficult to work with your hands. Normally what you want to do with monster clay is you want to throw it into your microwave, because it comes in these nice microwavable plastic things here. Or if you have a clay oven, you can throw it in there and warm it up. And the hard is really good for more smaller things because it can hold a lot of detail. I can see how hard that is. So generally I'd use this stuff for more smaller things. The medium I'd generally use for bigger things, just because it's easier to move around. Like I use the gray for making monster masks and this stuff. It's more for like figure stuff. Now let's talk about tools. When it comes to tools, there are so many different types of tools that an artist can find. There's wooden tools, there's metal tools. Well, they're more like dentistry tools, or for, you know, for wax carving. There's polymer clay tools, like little rubber ends there. Custom made tools as well. So there are just so many tools that you can choose from. My recommendation is go on to Amazon or to your local art store. You kind of get like wooden tools, or sometimes you'll get these types of tools with the metal ends, wooden handles, and a package of wood ones for pretty cheap as well. The ones that I heavily recommend always are these metal kind of dentistry tools, especially when it comes to working with oil-based clays, because you can heat up the tips of these and use them for some really fine detail. They're very durable, and generally they're pretty cheap. And as well as, you know, there's custom tools you can make yourself. Like this rake tool I made from a saw blade and one of these handles here from Paint and Sculpt. This one is just made from a pen with a little pin that I kind of formed into like this weird little triangle shape. It's really great for fine detail. But the types of tools that you want to have, that you make sure you have, there's a few. So you want to make sure you have a tool like this, kind of like a loop tool, where you're able to take away clay, carve out like wrinkles, or just take clay away. You can get them pretty big like this, or you can get them smaller for like finer detail. This is like a circular one. You can get ones that are shaped like triangles, or you can make your own custom ones. This is just made from a few pins that I shaped again at the end, and just use like a pen as the base. Just stuff some of the plumber's putty in there to hold everything in place, or super glue it, so that's definitely not going to move. So loop tools, ribbon tools are really great for detail work, taking away the clay. There's also other tools like rake tools. So this is a custom rake tool that I made just with a thin wire, then I wrapped a thicker wire around it to create this cool little rake shape. This one's made from a saw blade, you can see, and another pin. I filed down the saw teeth a little bit, and this is really good for raking. So raking tools help smooth out the surface. They take the clay from high points and they push them into low points, so you get like a nice even surface. And of course you can go from like a very sharp teethed one to more of like a finer edge one, and the more you work it and finer you get, the more like smoother the clay will become as well. So loop tools, rake tools. A butter knife works as well for a rake tool, since you know the butter knife is pretty fine. You can use that, and that's what I used to use before I made these ones. So a butter knife works pretty well. These wire brushes work as well as a rake tool that I found. You can get ones that are made from like really stiff wires to more of like a fiber. Here's another kind of loop tool, loopy rake tool that I made from a bobby pin. I kind of scored in the edges here, so you can do some small rakes, or you flip it around, use it as a loop tool. They can make like really small, fine wrinkles. It's just a bobby pin and some more of that plumber putty using a I'm not sure what this is. Yeah, I think it was like some weird giant toothpick. I think. So loop tool, rake tools, and then of course you can buy a pack of these metal tools, with like some very fine tips that you'll be able to like score in there, make wrinkles, push clay around. Honestly, you'll probably find 1, 2, maybe 3 tools that you really like to use. Like for myself, I use this one a lot just because it has like a nice rake on the back that I can switch to fast. Has not too sharp of a point, and it kind of flares out into this kind of kidney shape, which is good to push around, or if there's clay on top, I can melt it and then make some interesting shapes with that. And then I use this wooden tool a lot. I'd say this is probably my main tool. Has a nice point to it. It's kind of like almost like a spoon shape at the end there. This is great for making teeth as well. Then on the end it has more like a fin shape, pretty fine as well, that you can get in there and make some pretty cool details. I actually use this tool for most of the fish dude that I did here. You're gonna find a few tools that you prefer using only. I'd also highly recommend making a couple of your own tools. If you need a tool and you can't find it, generally just make your own, because it's pretty easy, pretty simple. And if you want a tutorial on how to make your own tools, let me know in the comments and I'll do a video on that as well. As well as, if you go to a weed shop, you can get like a dab set, which have dab tools in it, which make really great sculpting tools. Here's just kind of like a Pillsbury dough cutter that I use to cut my clay. It's very rigid, so it's not going to bend. It's great for just cutting, straight lines and shapes. I like to use that as well. An X-Acto blade set. Got this from the dollar store. It's great for creating really fine lines or cutting soft wires or aluminum. Highly recommend always having one of these around as well. Then you have like this kind of like weird loop, wire tool that you can use for cutting your clay into smaller pieces. Generally, you use this for pretty soft clay. I don't use this just because of the clay I use is a bit harder, so this is harder to actually pull through. But this stuff is good for like wet clay or wet clay, water-based clay. It's a lot easier to use with those. And then of course, if you're using oil-based clay, like monster clay or plastiline, I recommend a blowtorch. Just a quick way to heat up your clay or melt it if you need to. They're pretty cheap. This one has seen better days, but you know, it works. So yeah, those are some of the tools that I'd recommend. Now let's get into the materials that you can use to create your own sculpts. Now for materials, we're going to go over some wire. Now wire, like aluminum wire, is good for making, you know, your armatures. This stuff is from Michaels. I'm going to be honest with you, I am not a big fan of sculpting wire from Michaels, or honestly anywhere, just because they overcharge so much for aluminum wire at craft stores. Like this was like, I don't know, maybe $12 or $15, can't really remember, but this is all you get in the package. It's not much. This will maybe last you 1 or 2 armatures. But what I recommend, go to your local dollar store or hardware store, and you can just get basic wire like this, 65 feet, right, or 20 meters, for like $1.75. And this stuff, it's galvanized wire. You know, it's easy to bend, easy to use. It's got some strength to it as well, and it's cheap. All right, so for 65 feet of this stuff, this is what I generally use for all my armatures. This stuff, it's strong, it's durable. You can also get like thinner wires as well, like this stuff. This is really bendy, but this is more of the kind of wire that you will wrap around your armature just so the clay will stick. Now, if you're going to be building a big armature, this stuff is a thicker galvanized wire as well. You know, it's thicker, it's a little bit stronger, still easy to bend. But then you got this stuff, which is, I think, like steel, and it's pretty difficult to bend. But this is the type of wire that you're going to use for like big armatures. Like if you're making like a giant bust, you're gonna be using a lot of clay, you'd want like a pretty strong wire, of course. But I recommend going to your local dollar store, hardware store, and getting your wire there, just because it's fairly inexpensive. And you know, at the craft store, they're gonna overcharge you for wire. Like this much wire maybe cost me $10, whereas you know this was like the same price, right? So yeah. Check out your dollar stores and your hardware store for some pretty inexpensive wire. Other materials you'll want is wood, obviously. So you can go to your dollar store as well. You can get these like small pieces of like wood that are great for bases. They also have like bigger sheets of wood there as well, which make great little bases that you could sculpt on. Drill holes in there, you know, if you're making like a figure sculpt, just so it has like a nice firm base for you to build off of. Or honestly, if you go to your hardware store and you ask just, you know, if you can have their spare scraps of wood, then they'll give you just the wood that they're going to throw away. And these work well. I mean, it's wood, right? It's good for bases, it's good to work with. I mean, it's scrap wood that you'll need to use. You can also go to your hardware store and get yourself a metal floor flange like this, and get yourself a little pipe that you can screw in just like that. And this is pretty good for making busts or, you know, big armatures if you want. It's solid, it's steel, it's gonna work every time. All right, now it's essential to have good old aluminum foil. Again, go to your dollar store, you can get 75 square feet for pretty cheap. Comes in this roll, and I use aluminum foil to block out pretty much anything or everything that I make. You just check on this bunny here. I blocked him out with aluminum foil. Aluminum foil is great for blocking out because, you know, you don't want to be wasting a ton of clay. So it's good for blocking out your shapes. Beads, or plastic eyeballs, I call them. So these, I got these just from Amazon. They're like tiny, like little eyeballs with kind of like screw ends that you can use. I use these ones for the bunny that I made. You know, they work fairly well. But generally, what I like to use for eyeballs is just typical beads. Alright, I got a giant package of beads from Michael's when they're on sale. They come in different sizes, bigger ones to like super tiny. My fingers are too fat to grab a tiny one. As you can see, like this one's small. You can get like different colors like orange. But beads work great for eyeballs. And I usually just use beads for all my eyes because, you know, they work. Now if you're doing something bigger, like a mask, you can pretty much use anything spherical for your eyeballs. Like I got these during Halloween time. I'll use these sometimes just for eyeballs if I have a bigger sculpt. They work pretty well. I mean, I turn them around just because the pupils are not centered. Usually these are just placeholders for when I'm making like a monster mask, if I'm doing something humanoid, fairly big. Of course, you know, the eyeballs range. If you want to do something bigger, like an alien, then you can find Christmas ornaments or anything, you know, plastic and sphere-like that you can cut in half. Usually those work pretty good for eyeballs. But I recommend beads. They're great. They work. Another thing that I recommend are something called calipers, or a measuring tool. You can also just use a basic ruler if you want. But calipers, they help you measure out proportions if you're doing like figure sculpts or even faces. They're pretty necessary, I think, especially if you're getting into more, you know, anatomically correct things. Or if you're doing humans, you want to make sure your proportions are correct. And then of course, you know, wire cutters for your wires. And then pliers to help, you know, form the shapes of your wire. So, you know, you don't want to mess up your hands because, you know, these are the money makers. You know what I'm saying? These are the money makers. And of course, if you have it, you want to have a good old clay warmer for your clay there. With just like, it's a wooden box with tin foil inside with a heat lamp right on the top there. And it heats up your clay, if that's the way you go. And then lighter fluid. If you're using oil-based clay, like monster clay, lighter fluid is a great thing to have to help smooth out your sculpts. Kind of breaks down that surface of the clay on the top and gets rid of all the fingerprints or rake marks and just smooths everything out. And then, you know, a sponge to help smooth everything out, or paint brushes as well work. But generally, I use like a sponge. And if you want to get crazy and get into monster mask making, well, you're gonna need one more thing. You're gonna want a head armature. This is an Ed head from Monster Makers. Around, oh, how much was this? $100 maybe? But I've had this for a while, and this is what I use to make monster masks. You sculpt on top of it, put the clay on there, and you do your monster mask, whatever. And yeah, you can also, you don't have to have one of these. You can go to like the dollar store, and they have those foam heads you can get. You can use those as well, but you'd have to really build up the clay for that. Or I think Amazon have similar ones, but they're pretty cheaply made. But I figure they'll do the job as well. But Monster Makers, they make a really good one. Yeah, if you want to get into mask making, definitely get yourself one of these babies. So those are the tools and the clay and all that and the materials that you'll need to get into clay sculpting if you want. Now for digital sculpting, there's so many apps, programs out there that you can use to get started. The one that I use is called ZBrush. ZBrush is a pretty expensive program. I believe they've gone a subscription route now, and it is designed specifically to be like the best digital sculpting program that you could use. There's tons of different ones out there, but I enjoy ZBrush. I mean, I paid the money for it a long time ago, and that's what I use. The daunting thing about ZBrush is that the UI is horrendous. There's so much in that program. The UI is just very hard to learn. That's probably the hardest thing about learning ZBrush. Probably any digital sculpting program is the UI. Now, if you don't have the money to afford that, there's something called Blender. Now, Blender is like an all-in-one 3D program, but they also have a sculpting program inside this program. And Blender was the very first program that I used to get into 3D modeling and then 3D sculpting before I switched to ZBrush and dropped the big money on that program. But Blender can do the same thing. It doesn't have as many tools and brushes and other things like ZBrush has, because ZBrush is built specifically for digital sculpting, whereas Blender is more of like an all-around package. You can 3D sculpt in it, you can box model, you can render, you can animate, you can do a lot in that program. It's very in-depth. The UI is kind of horrendous as well. Not as bad as ZBrush though, but Blender is free, and if you're looking to get into 3D modeling, 3D sculpting, that is probably where I'd recommend you to start with Blender, just to see if you like it. And there are tons and tons of tutorials for Blender on YouTube. There's a great community as well that'll help you out. A lot of forums, discords, things like that. So check out Blender, it is free. But another one that I want to show you is one that I actually really liked, and it only costs 20 bucks on the iPad. Now, this is something called Nomad Sculpt. You get it for the iPad. It's a one-time payment of like 20 bucks, 22 bucks. The price may have gone up for this. I'm not too sure. But I mean, it does the same stuff as Blender and ZBrush, and it's for the iPad. It's cheap, and pretty much think of it like Procreate, but you know, it's digital pretty much. What's great about this is the UI is pretty easy, but don't let that fool you, because this program can do a lot of things, right? What I like about it is I can just go upstairs, sit down, and I can just start sculpting, you know, and practicing. Or if I just want to doodle around, make some things, I can just whip out the iPad and just start using it. It's pretty neat, very affordable, but for what you pay for it and for what it does is amazing. I highly recommend Nomad Sculpt. It's something that I started using within the last year or so, and it's just great to, you know, just have like a program on the iPad where I don't have to be in my office. You know, if I go out, get a coffee, I can sit down and just kind of like practice whatever on this. And what's great about this is you can actually save your sculpts in this and export them to Blender or ZBrush, and then continue working on them as well. If you're into 3D printing, you can 3D print with this program as well. It also has a really good rendering engine in it, surprisingly. But yeah, Nomad Sculpt, check it out for the iPad. Highly recommend it. You can do just so much. Of course, you know, I'm just kind of doodling around. But those are the programs that I recommend and that I use. ZBrush is what I use, just because, you know, I bought the full program years ago and I've been using it ever since. Blender is what I started out on. It's only gotten better, and plus it's free. Nomad Sculpt, if you got an iPad, check it out as well. Pretty cheap as well. Powerful program, and it's gonna pretty much do everything that Blender is gonna do as well. If you're looking to get into Nomad Sculpting, check out Dave Reed on YouTube. His whole channel is around Nomad Sculpting and how to get into it. He has so many videos of how to sculpt, tutorials on Nomad Sculpt, like 300 and something videos of how to get you started in sculpting within the program itself. He's a great sculptor, great artist, and I highly recommend checking out Dave Reed if you're really getting into Nomad. For Blender, I suggest Blender Guru. This guy has been around forever, 220 videos, and he has so many tutorials on how to get started in Blender. His donut tutorials are very popular, but he goes through everything from sculpting, box modeling, rendering, you name it, whatever Blender does, he'll teach you how to do it. And for ZBrush, check out Michael Pavlovich. Amazing artist. He has tons of videos on ZBrush. His playlist of how to get started, his tutorials, Intro to ZBrush is really great. It's all free, and he goes through the UI and everything of how to get started with the ZBrush. Very in-depth. The guy is amazing with all this free content that he provides for ZBrush. So if that's the way you're looking as well for ZBrush, check that out. Well, that is pretty much everything. Hopefully that gives you a little bit of direction of what you want to do. If you want to get into clay, if you want to do digital, if you want to do both, you know, doing digital is going to help your clay progress, and then doing clay is going to help your digital progress. So they mesh very well together. And if you have any questions, be sure to leave a comment down below. I'll answer as best as I can. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to hit that like button. Subscribe if you haven't already. Been working on a big video that should be coming out in the next couple weeks, hopefully. But in the meantime, I'll catch you in the next spooky video.